Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nancy Lowry, and I am Director of Innovation at the MCA and Medical Center of the Americas, and welcome to our first Remote Tech Tuesday. So I'm going to ask you for a little bit of patience in case the technology doesn't quite work how we plan, but we will get through this. And so the name of the Tech Tuesday is Tips and Tools for Working Remotely. We understand at the MCA that these are difficult times for all of us, and as such, we're trying to help provide resources where people can work together remotely while still staying safe, and where we can continue to promote and strengthen our innovation ecosystem. So we have two great speakers today. They have a lot of useful information, a lot of experience on working remotely. And so in just a second, I'm going to turn it over to them. But before we start, just a few ground rules. If you want to ask a question, you'll see a box over to the right that says question. Please type in your question and we will direct it to our moderator, who is Carlos Martinez Vela. Carlos Martinez Vela is the CEO of Pioneers 21, and he will then direct the questions to our panelists. So once again, bear in mind that this is the first time we've done this webinar this way, and so we will try to make it go as smoothly as possible. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carlos, and Carlos is going to introduce our speakers. And so once again, if you've got questions, type it in, we'll get them answered. Carlos, it's yours.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nancy, and thank you for the invitation to moderate this event. You know, I just want to say, you know, I'm Carlos Martinez Vela. I'm an executive director. Together with our change of name, we changed my title. So we were the Hub of Human Innovation. Now we are Pioneers 21. I'm the executive director, and as you know, we are a business incubator here in El Paso. We help entrepreneurs, small businesses, and startups get started, launch, and grow. And you know, when Nancy reached out and we started talking about this event, one of the issues that came up is that very clearly, now more than ever, or perhaps now it's even clearer that we're in this together. You know, building an innovation economy and an innovation economy ecosystem is a collaborative work. In our community, sometimes due to scarcity, we retreat to our own corners. I think MCA, Pioneers 21, and all the organizations that are involved in this project, which continues amid this crisis, we understand that we're in this together. So welcome everyone here, and this is going to be very simple, really. And I just repeat what Nancy said, which is that we're experimenting today with the technology and to see how this works, so bear with us. The two speakers are Erik Pavia, John Macias. Each of them is going to introduce themselves. Erik is going to go first. There are going to be some slides. Then there's going to be time for Q&A, which you can direct using the control panel or the webinar panel that you have. And then John is going to go. I'm going to be getting the questions and just directing them to the speakers. So with that, I turn it over to Erik first.
Hey everybody, my name is Erik Pavia. I've been working in tech for about 8 years now. That's my background. I was born and raised here in El Paso, but I spent several years working in the Bay Area for a software company. And where my experience is relevant to this topic is that that company started off as like a remote first team. So when I joined, we were about 4 employees, and we had a very, very flexible travel and a very flexible work from home policy. So anybody could go anywhere in the world that they wanted to work from if they wanted to, and spend a month or two working remotely. I was the head of operations there, and I helped scale the business from 4 employees to about 55 employees when I left, and scaled that remote functionality as we built the organization. So by the time I left, we had a central office in New York City with about 40 employees, but we had people in El Paso, Austin, LA, San Francisco. So we really got to see what it takes to go from a really small team that can do remote work to a significantly larger team. I guess to top off the introduction, now I'm in El Paso building a new software company, working on employee health and wellness, which I guess is somewhat related to this, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that when I'm done. John, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. My name is John Macias, and I'm the Executive Vice President at Incite Consultancy. Prior to, well, let me tell you a little bit more about Incite. So Incite Consultancy was created by our CEO and founder, Rosalinda Natividad. And I think it's about 6 years ago, she created the company to meet the needs of the nonprofits in the El Paso community, focusing specifically on strategic planning and fund development, which mostly has to do with working with external funds such as grants at the federal, state, foundation, and corporate level, which was a good pairing for what I used to do when I worked at the University of Texas at El Paso as a research administrator. I am also a native El Pasoan, save for the 2 years that we lived in Austin. And it was during that time that I developed a large portion of my remote working skills, because at that point, when I went to put in my resignation, the university asked if there was any way that I would consider staying on. But of course, due to the limitations of geography, it meant that I had to turn all of my, what used to be in-person work, into a split between coming in once a month back to El Paso for in-person meetings, and then the remainder of it was created through a remote office that I had and maintained in Austin. So that's a little bit of my background, and today I'll be talking, after Erik, a little bit more about some of the tools that are out there for the newly minted teleworker, focusing mostly on those that are low cost to no cost as we continue to do our social distancing.
Sweet. So I guess I could just get started. Keynote didn't work right now. I'm going to give it one last attempt, and if it doesn't work, then I'll do PDF. But let's see if this plays. Can you see that, John? Is it still just a blank screen?
It's a blank screen.
Okay, let me just try Keynote then, or sorry, PDF. There we go. Can you guys see that one?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Full
Probably
screen.
make the screen.
Is that working? Does it? You know what? It's because whenever I start the presentation, it like pauses your view, so it doesn't let me show. Whatever. I'll just show you guys the little in the little window. You guys know what borders look like. It'll be fine. Okay. So usually my slideshows are very minimalistic and just are like text on a black background. But since we're all stuck at home, I got bored and I decided to go out and find very pretty scenery to fill the back of each of one of my slides. So each slide will have a different pretty picture for all of you to enjoy. You know, I want to talk a bit about keeping productivity and culture alive within a company when you're doing remote work. I think one of the things that when we started at my prior company, it was called Notch. We were heavily focused on the first part, which was productivity. We thought that in order to have an effective remote team, we were going to have to figure out how to keep everybody working, you know, from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever for 40 hours a week. And what we learned pretty quickly in building out this team and in building out this function is that there are really two elements that you need to be concerned with. So it's not just productivity, but it's also employee engagement. What we realized is that if your employees are working really hard, that's great. But if they feel disconnected from your organization or from the team, they start to not only get lonely. Working remotely is a very lonely experience, which isn't great for them as individuals, but it also starts to hurt their productivity as well. And so what we kind of stumbled into was that the best way to have a remote team was not just to focus entirely on productivity, but to spend a bit of time focusing on employee engagement as well, and keeping everybody feeling like they were part of a team, even if they couldn't see each other in person, or spend any time in person. And we had certain people that we actually hired who they wouldn't meet the team for like months at a time. So we had an office in Romania. We had our first fully remote employee was in Houston, when our offices were in San Francisco, and we had to work really hard to make sure that these people felt like they were part of the organization. So I'll talk a bit about both. Some of this stuff might come off as a little simplistic, but I'm just going to share it anyway, just in case some of you might be weighing the pros and cons or around doing some of these decisions. So one of the very first things that we realized we absolutely had to do when running the remote team was to create a schedule, to create a fixed working schedule. And when we first started, we thought we were going to be like a cool, hip startup where people could kind of work at whatever hours they wanted to, have some flexibility in their work. And although it was a great vision, what we ended up finding out that just wasn't good for several reasons. On the productivity side, if you don't know when someone is working, it's very difficult to know when to ask them for work or when to ask questions, and you don't know when it is that you can expect them to respond. So having fixed work hours is very important for that. Secondarily, there's a lot of interaction and exchange that can happen online, even if you're remote. And if people are online at different times, you end up missing a lot of those interactions. So if this is something that your team is weighing around, whether you should have fixed work hours, I think it's very valuable. If you want to have some flexibility, maybe different time zones have different hours that they start. That's also fine. But you should definitely have, at least I recommend that you have a schedule for when you can expect people to be online and responsive. I think for individuals, this is also incredibly helpful because it doesn't throw off your entire life having to work remotely for a couple of months. If you're used to waking up at 7 a.m. and getting to the office at like 8:30 or 9, this helps you keep a little bit of that structure. Another thing that's really important to do is to check in frequently. I think when people are first making the transition from being in-person team to a remote team, I think one of the hesitations is that you don't want to be overbearing, or you don't want to be annoying with how frequently you check in with people, or how much you bother people. But one of the things that we found was that you almost can't be too annoying about this stuff, especially when people are working remotely and you can't kind of look over their shoulders. So I think the sentiment might be something along the lines of, my employees, I trust my employees to work and to be productive. And I think that's true. I think you should trust your employees to be productive and to be able to put in the work. But there's something that's really important, like an important principle, which is that a lot of the stuff that we take for granted, working together in an office where we can see each other and where we can interact very easily, a lot of that just goes out the window when you're working distributed. So you might not realize that when you're in the office, you talk to your employees or to your coworkers a lot, several times now, where you walk by their doorway in their office, or you pop by their cubicle or whatever. There are a lot of there's a lot of opportunities to do that when you're in the same space. And what you might very quickly notice is, as soon as you're working remotely, you just interact with people significantly less than you would with than if you were in person. So you can check in very frequently. I'll talk a little bit about real-time chat in a second. I think check-ins should also be very structured. So if you're a small team, it's very easy to do, a daily kickoff call where everybody just gets on a Zoom and you do like a little bit of a roll call for 10-15 minutes, and then you get your day started. If you're a large organization, that would be impossible. So maybe you do an organization-wide check-in on Monday and on Friday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you just have the managers check in with their teams or with individuals. But I think having that frequent checking in is really important, and it starts to breed habits around sharing information and opening up discourse. This is another thing that I've seen people not particularly do a great job of outside of the tech world. So, when we were a startup, we had real-time chat from the very beginning, but I've met several small businesses here in El Paso, or large businesses actually, who are very stuck to email and phone calls. And while email and phone calls are great and are definitely tools that you should be using, real-time chat is essential. And companies that don't have real-time chat are going to find that communicating is a little bit harder than it should be. So why is real-time chat so important? Real-time chat is really important. And by the way, by real-time chat, I mean, Google Chat, which you can get if you have G Suite for free, Microsoft Teams, or Slack. There are tons of these on the market. I would recommend one of the work-based chat applications, though, and I can talk about why that's important from, for protecting your company and security and everything else. But you want to have a chat application that people can, use to direct message each other or to have real-time conversations with your team. And the reason this is so important is because, when you're in the office, again, there's the ability to pop in to each other's offices or to have the water cooler talk or whatever. Phone calls and email are very poorly suited for casual conversation. And so if all you have to communicate are phone calls and email, what you'll see is the amount of information that's being conveyed between all of your employees is gonna drop off. Real-time chat kind of enables you not only to do team-wide, company-wide announcements, which is very important. It also allows people to interact very quickly and in a more casual manner, and that's going to keep the amount of interaction up when you as you get started as a team. I guess one high-level principle, another one to flag is, and I keep referring to this, is volume of communication or volume of information being exchanged. One of the reservations that people have about purely remote teams, and this was before all of the coronavirus issues, is that there's this idea or this belief that remote teams just can't exchange ideas or information as efficiently as in-person teams. And so one of the things that remote teams work really hard to do is to drive that information transfer as high as possible in their virtual or remote environment. And so a lot of what I'm talking about is to achieve that, to drive this information transfer rate up. Once you set up your virtual chat, but also when you're doing your video calls or even an email, one thing that's really important is to keep the culture of your company alive, and don't let it die just because you guys are all remote. So one of the things that you'll notice about email is that it tends to be very business oriented, right? When you draft an email in the business world, you're very focused on making your email as efficient as possible, as short as possible, and conveying vital pieces of information. There's usually not a whole lot of room for like banter, chit chat, or joking or whatever. And so if your team's not used to working remotely, you might see some of this stuff die. So it might pay dividends for you as the manager or for you as employees to actively make an effort to encourage this type of banter. And I'll get to some ideas right now. If you set up a chat application, you can create casual channels for having more casual conversations. If you're the manager and you're leading, team check-in through like Zoom or through like a video call, you can start by asking people, what's like a good joke you heard over the weekend? I mean, that's corny, but like you kind of get the point. What if you don't have this stuff, again, people start to get lonely and work starts to get really, really boring. And people become significantly less engaged in what it is that they're doing while working from home. I guess another way to frame this is you want people to be paying as much attention to the team as possible while they're tied to their computers. And if it's all work, people are going to start to get bored. They're going to start to surf the web. They're going to, I don't know, play video games or start watching Netflix or whatever. But if there's something fun going on where they feel like they're part of a conversation, then they're going to be a lot more focused on their work. And yes, there might be a little bit of like playing around and messing around between the teams online, but trust me, it's no more than what already happens in your offices. So create ceremonies and rituals. One thing that you might not notice if you're in an environment where you've only worked in person is that every office has ceremonies and rituals, whether they're explicitly stated or not. So maybe you have very specific structured things that you already do at work. Maybe there's certain things that kind of happen more casually. So, you know, every Wednesday, like Tina and Bob go get coffee or whatever it might be. Again, it's very important to keep that stuff alive, just to keep people, help people stay engaged and help keep the cadence to the week. One of the things that when you're working remotely is that the days start to blend together because you don't have the same delineation between the weekend and the week and the middle of the week and happy hours on Friday or whatever it might be. So these ceremonies and rituals not only help with the banter and keeping people engaged, but they also help create some amount of structure for the work. So, you know, what I mean by ceremonies and rituals will vary depending on the organization and your culture and what it is you do. Monday check-ins that I mentioned earlier, that's part of this sort of like ceremony and ritual. Every Monday, everybody gets on a Zoom call and checks in, and that's part of the week's ritual. You might have a debrief on Friday where you talk about what happened, you know, milestones that the company hit during the week or whatever. Maybe you have like a more casual thing in the middle of the week. It depends. You know, some things that I've seen people do, the Monday check-in I just mentioned, one of my friends has a company that at the end of every week, they do an award ceremony for, you know, little weekly awards that they do in their office. So one of them is like, who had the funniest joke this week? And they give like, I mean, now they can't give the trophy, but they have like, they show off the trophy on the camera or whatever. And you know, it's something fun for people to do, and it like helps wind down the week. My old company, we did celebrity sightings. So it was a company in New York, and everybody would get together and like name which celebrities they had run into during that week. It doesn't have to be on Zoom or on a phone call. You can have a chat thread that's specifically for great things the team has done. Maybe you closed a sale, or you got really great feedback from a customer, or you hired a new employee. There's certain things you can do to kind of keep that conversation constantly going. This one might sound weird. The reason I include this one, pick up the phone, is I didn't realize I had this aversion. If you're under the age of like 35, people under 35, millennials and younger, tend to hate unscheduled phone calls, which is a little silly, but that's just the truth. So you might notice this if you have, you know, kids in that age, or you know, maybe if you think about your own behaviors, like people under the age of whatever 35 will not pick up the phone and call each other. They'll text each other first and say, hey, are you free for a call? You need to get rid of that habit in the workplace. If you're in work hours, you shouldn't hesitate to just pick up the phone and call your coworker, or if they're calling you, just be super accepting of the phone call. It dramatically increases the amount of work that you're able to get through, and again, just helps increase the connectivity between you and your coworkers. Another thing on the call thing, so video calls are superior, vastly superior to conference calls. If you can do a video call over a phone call, you know, it's not too much of a hassle to just do like a FaceTime video or to do a Zoom, whatever, that's very important. If you're doing a group call, you should almost definitely, if you cannot avoid doing a conference call, do a video call. The level of engagement on conference calls is trash. Everybody, if they're on a conference call, will try to multitask, will try to work on something else, and they're not going to be paying attention. We learned that video calls are very important to make sure that people are actually paying attention. And again, they increase the quality of the communications. If you're doing a video call, I highly recommend that you create a cameras on rule, because people will join the video call, they'll have their cameras off, and they'll say, oh, it's because I didn't put on my makeup or I'm in sweats. Who cares? If you're in sweats, it's okay. We totally understand the situation. We want to see your face so that we know that you're paying attention, and not Zoom, like, you know, spaced out, again, watching Netflix or whatever, playing video games or something else. You should be paying attention to what's going on in the conversation. I think this is the last thing. Encourage hobbies to keep everyone sane, and encourage these to be done by the team or by segments of the team. Not everyone in your company is going to have the same interests, so you might want to put in a little bit of legwork to find out what are the interest groups that your company, people within your company have, and create dedicated spaces or dedicated events for them to participate in them. So you could do, right now a lot of things that I'm seeing are game sessions, so people playing video games online. You might create a channel for people who want to play video games online together. People are watching like Netflix shows together. People are working out together, or they're doing like scheduled workouts together where they find an instructor to lead the workout, or they just find a video on YouTube and they'll all kind of do it at the same time with their cameras on or with their cameras off, and they'll just kind of text about it. This can be during work hours if you want. It can be after work if you want, but it's incredibly, incredibly important to promote this again, just so people feel like they're part of a team, but also so that you can be sure that your employees aren't going crazy and getting depressed at home. There's this saying about like a lot of students that like school is their refuge from home. If you come from like a broken home or a broken home environment. I think for a lot of people, whether they like to admit it or not, work is their refuge from home. And even if they don't have a broken home, if you go to work, it might be because that's where your friends are at. Maybe you really like working with the people that you work with. So don't be shy or embarrassed or afraid to create some of these more social things within the work structure. I think it'll go a long way for the sort of mental health of all of your employees. Quick plug, the company that I'm working on now, I started a new company. It's called Pantheon. We're building workplace wellness software. So the previous company that I worked for, I was in charge of organizational culture, and we ended up being named one of the best places to work by Inc. 2 years in a row. And I decided that I wanted to build products in that space. So this product is specifically for workplace wellness and employee well-being. One of the things that we're doing over this period of time, because we're seeing that a lot of people don't know how to work out from home, is that every single day we're posting a new guide for like how you can do exercise from home. So if you want to share this with any of your employees, it's a resource that we've started building and we'll continue to build it. If you have any questions for ideas or tips or some of the stuff that you might want to be doing with your employees, health and wellness, or even just organizational culture, that's my work email address. Feel free to contact me for absolutely anything. I have a ton of free time on my hands right now, since I'm, can't do a lot of my regular work. So I'd be happy to help you with any of those issues. That's it. Are there any questions?
So, so for everyone who's attending on the system, you should submit your question using the question section on the control panel. The first question that is here is from Ivana Sanchez, and is, how do you recommend you check in, by text or call or email or video chat? That was great, Erik, by the way. Thank you for sharing all this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so if you, the one reason I would not recommend text, and that I would highly recommend setting up Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever, is so I have a law background and I'm very paranoid about company information. As a company manager or even as an employee, it's best if you keep all your company communications in a company channel. If it's a casual check-in with like a work friend, text messages is fine. But if it's something that's a little bit more centralized that you're doing as the organization, definitely do it through like a Slack or a Microsoft Teams or whatever. I know there's some reservations, and John will probably talk about this, around using Slack because of security. I think Microsoft Teams at this point has like all the security you could want if you're like a law firm or an accounting firm, or if those are one of your concerns. Slack security is also really good, but if you're already using Microsoft Suite, I recommend that. But if it's organizationally led, do not do it. That's my personal recommendation, is don't do it through text message.
You know, if I may add to that, I think it also makes sense just to keep kind of, other than security and keeping all company information in one part, is separation, right? A certain degree of separation between, you know, I've worked, if I may speak with my experience, if I've worked in some projects or initiatives where a lot of the work was done on WhatsApp, and it was torture.
Yeah,
because
because you don't know when the day ends.
Yeah, everything
Yeah.
starts mixing. So I think it's very valuable to this advice of keeping it separate and have a specific tool to communicate and to do the check-in on like Microsoft Teams or Slack or the other options that we have. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions coming through the panel here. If not, okay, so there is one here from our dear friend Serena Harper. Any specific advice on how to keep a company feeling whole when some are working from home and some still working in the office?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what I mentioned applies to this. One of the very important things, I should have mentioned this actually, is if you've got a set of people that's in an office and then a set of people that's distributed and remote, the people that are going to start to feel like outsiders are the remote people, and everyone in the office is still going to have that connectivity, and they're still going to feel like they're part of a team or whatever. And so really where the onus falls is for the people that are in the office to make sure that they do everything that they can to include the people that are remote. So if you do a team-wide check-in, you know, with people in the office and people who are remote, the people in the office can see each other in person, and that's great. You need to set up something so that you can see the faces of all of the people who are remote. So maybe you set up a TV where you put, you know, all the remote people on Zoom or whatever, like have their faces visible so that you can see them and you feel like they're in the room, and then have a camera where they can see the entire team that's like sitting at a conference table or whatever. What you might see happening is that the people who are working virtually might feel ignored during meetings. So again, taking the onus to stop and say, does anyone on Zoom or whatever have any questions, or making sure that there's some sort of system so that if they have something to say, they can speak up. You know, investing in conference speakers is very valuable if you can, because then, you know, people can just unmute themselves and ask a question and interrupt. So that's really important. If you have new employees who are starting remote, you know, getting bios from them, because you're not going to have, you know, again, it's figuring out what are the things that you take for granted in being in an office environment, and then replicating not necessarily that interaction, but like the results of that interaction. So creating bios for all of your employees where people can see where are they from, what are their interests, what are they into, and sharing those with the people who are in the office.
All right.
So again, just going out of your way to do that.
All right. That was great. By the way, somebody, actually Emily Loya, is asking if you can put up your contact info again, Erik.
Yeah.
Erik. Another question here
go.
from Andy Farias. How do you recommend introducing a structured work from home strategy, such as the one you just unpacked in an organizational ecosystem, which has historically relied on phone calls and emails, only led by a large generational gap? It's a big question and big challenge. So,
yeah, I think, Andy, I think a big one is if you can get a majority of people. So you know, if you're trying to get people using more tools, you just have to get a majority of people to use them, and they'll force everyone else to use it. Or you need to get leadership buy-in, one of the two. I think leadership buy-in depends on the strength of the leader. If the leader can enforce that and push it onto, like, you know, sectional managers or team managers or whatever, then it'll work. If they don't have that ability, then it might not work. So, you know, like getting the buy-in there, or if it's a more casual thing, getting permission, at least from the manager, to use something like Slack or Microsoft Teams, and then moving some of this stuff there so that people have no choice but to join. So it is pretty hard, but I think if you can communicate to your managers, you know, the benefits of doing this stuff, and show show them, and this is actually a perfect excuse right now, or a perfect opportunity to put some of this stuff up, because I think a lot of people are realizing that they can't continue business as usual if they're forced to be remote. And so offering this as a solution to them to help with some of these problems might actually be a good opportunity. But
It's
if you don't have that
sorry.
organizational buy-in, it's tough. Sorry, if you don't have that leadership buy-in, it's tough.
It's interesting what you say, because I think there are a couple of issues come to mind from this question and from what you're saying. One is training, right? It's there is the assumption that people are going to figure it out, and it's not that simple for a lot of people. And the other one, as we're seeing right now, this sudden need to work from home, to go to school from home, is making very, very visible the kinds of divides and gaps there are across generations, across who has access to broadband or not, who has state-of-the-art computer or not. So I think there is another big question that is going to come up, and I think that for all of us working in this innovation space, is important to keep in mind is how do we make this issue of working from home inclusive, and as opposed to just exacerbating the divides that now have come to the fore with force everywhere, right? One last question for you, Erik, before we turn to John, this is from Jesus Carrillo. Hello, Jesus. How can you make check-in not feel much like micromanaging?
Two ways. One, if it's scheduled, then it doesn't feel like you have a manager breathing down your neck. You know that it's coming, and it's just a part of like what the conversation is. Two, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't always have to be a check-in, like what did you do yesterday and like what's the progress of your work. It could just be as simple as how are you doing this morning, and is there anything that I can help you with. So again, especially if you're doing this for the first time and you're a manager and you want to make sure not to like alienate your employees, framing it as you looking for ways to help, might be beneficial, so that they don't feel like you're I don't know, like on their ass and like trying to micromanage. And it could be a very sincere thing that if you've never managed a remote team and you're trying to learn, this is a great way to like surface information.
Very good. Thank you. If there are any other questions for Erik, you can keep sending them. For the time being, we now go to John Macias.
All right, thank you so much. I think I'm just waiting for the presenter mode to come over. Got it. Thank you. And as I'm queuing this up, I think one other thing that I wanted to share from the perspective of that last question from Jesus is that in addition to it being more of a ritual in terms of these check-ins, I think if you're also asking your team what their priorities are for the day, I think that helps them get an idea and an opportunity for them to report out to you in terms of how they're going to schedule that day. And it also helps them have a opportunity to have control over that particular item. So let me just do a quick check. Has everybody seen my presenter screen currently? It's entitled Tools. Great.
Yes.
So I'm looking at this from the perspective of many of you in the last 2 weeks have been asked to do something that perhaps is not something that you're necessarily used to. Perhaps you're used to working at a singular environment and working with your team that's right next to you, and you didn't necessarily have enough time to think about the tools that you would be launching or leveraging in order to utilize this new remote social distancing aspect of where we all find ourselves. And so I wanted to focus on some of these tools that are of no cost to low cost, and also look at it from the framework of what are the existing tools that you might already be leveraging and the platforms, so that you could see where these automatically stack in and integrate. I wanted to talk first about some of the basics. When we talked about the idea of working from home, there's this subtle shift that we talked about earlier about how you maintain these healthy boundaries in your life. And Carlos alluded to this earlier about how when you live in Slack, and if you decide to save it to or install the application not only to your computer, but also to your mobile device and anywhere else that it might exist, you might suddenly be inundated when you have a team that's working, let's say, sun up to sundown, and they're asking you questions at all different time zone hours. And that can be a little bit invasive if you already have set out to put forth some level of schedule for yourself. So I would say, think about it from the perspective of what your dedicated workspace will look like. And not only your virtual one in terms of your computer and your systems, but also your physical manifestations of where you'll be working from. You'll see today, if my camera's still pushing out, that I'm working from my home office today. Fortunately, we have a dedicated home office, but I'm also working with my spouse. And so we've had to talk about what does it mean when we're working remotely, and what are some of the conversations that we need to be sensitive of for other people in the community that we work with that shouldn't be privy to the conversation that we're having, and when should we take a step back and work from a different location. And I think that segues into my next point about these conversations that you should intend to have with your roommates or your partners or your spouses if you are social distancing with them, and also to a large part if you're also social distancing with your children, and being able to have a conversation about what does it mean when I get up for the day and I'm still maintaining my routine, I'm still getting ready, and I'm going to go to the office, but instead of going to the office across town, I'm walking from the bedroom to the office or to the dining room table. And I think that's one of the important things that we need to be considerate about, is that just because we're teleworking does not mean that we will be working those extended hours. All of a sudden, we're not shifting to be working 12 additional hours or 10 hours. If anything, the literature shows that you can be more effective because you are not inundated with as many requests in real time or as many distractions. Another basic item that I just wanted to put out there for consideration are your internet speeds that you're leveraging. If you previously, let's say you were working out of the MCA and you were benefiting from their fiber optic line that goes into the facility, you probably have become accustomed to very quick internet, and maybe you decided to not maintain any internet at home anymore. And you might need to go back and consider that. Maybe the hotspot that you're utilizing off your phone is not cutting it for what you're doing. And also look out there to some of the major telecom providers. A lot of them are relaxing if you're needing additional bandwidth in order to get the work done. And also considerations for folks that are needing to install new accounts are still doing that, and also not necessarily giving penalties if you're looking to cancel that service in the next 2 or 3 months. It's also a point of consideration if all of a sudden you have multiple people, not only in your own home, that are having to rely on that bandwidth or that internet speed, but also what it means when you're working in a wireless environment, and suddenly all of your neighbors are also leveraging not necessarily your Wi-Fi, but that amount of internet traffic might inadvertently draw down your bandwidth as well if it's not a specific type of connection. And also there's this idea that the radio signals that are crossing and the increased use might put more traffic, which makes your items a little bit slower. So I talk about that because from the perspective of bandwidth and when to use Wi-Fi, if you are working with something that necessitates some level of direct connection or maintaining that connection with some level more consistency, you can go ahead and use a good old Ethernet connection, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. Some of your computer devices might have them, but that allows you to connect right into your modem or to your router and have that dedicated connection so that you don't have to worry about the increased traffic on your Wi-Fi. I also wanted to bring forth the idea that our mobile phones in most instances, and up until a couple of months, even here in El Paso, tend to have faster upload and download speeds than what we could get with some of our other providers. That might not be necessarily the case if you have a fiber optic connection that's coming into your home, but for the most part, you're able to use the hotspot on your phone as a good alternate source. And now's also a good time to talk and encourage you to go and look at your mobile provider's website and see if they're offering the lifting on any kind of data caps, meaning that if you reach a certain gigabit or gigabyte of download within a certain time frame, they would then go in and what's called throttle your speed of what you could do with your hotspotting. A lot of that has been lifted recently, and you can now go and see at many of those telecom providers and actually verify what those restrictions are that have been lifted and through what period. One of the other items, just from a basic perspective, is when you have a little bit of downtime, I think just be patient with yourself and make it a point to go and practice with some of this new tech that you might be working with in your life. One of the things that I used to do when I was working at the UTEP School of Nursing is that it was my role to help with tech adoption across faculty and utilizing point of service technology. And with advanced practice nurse clinicians and as well as students. And some of these students were second degree seekers, meaning they had come back after having successfully completed a baccalaureate degree or graduate degree in some other field. And as they were studying to become nurses, we were encouraging them the opportunity to have all these reference manuals in the palm of their hand. And not everybody wanted necessarily to take to that. They wanted to rely on some of the previous methods that were the old dosage calculations or the books. But I bring this up because if you pace yourself and you're gentle with the approach and you're not trying to learn all of the world's secrets in one sitting, you're by and large going to be okay. I think within that same perspective, and Erik alluded to this in terms of earlier when he said about creating a schedule, I think another way to consider it is also having a discussion about what is your daily intent going to be for each day that you set out. I think there is sometimes a susceptibility and the potential to think that because you don't have a commute and because you're going to have all of this dedicated time that you're going to be able to task through all of these multiple items. That may be the case, but remember, you still want to do within the boundaries that you set out for yourself in terms of when you're at work and when you're transitioning back to being at home. And I mention that because within our work culture, we make it a point to share among each other's tasks what our daily intent is for three major things that we intend to do that have either been sitting on the back burner, might be considered a rapid response item, or are just something that we need to personally do in order to have fulfillment for the day. And then that naturally leads us to this discussion that we can have with our team in terms of who can I depend on for support in order to get some of this done, or what might have to come off of my plate that others can support you with, because by and large, we tend to all work with very talented teams, and it's best when you're able to lean on those that have the subject matter expertise in something else. This one seems a little bit remedial, but I think when you're on conference calls and video conference calls, just think about the idea of utilizing headphones, just because it helps with the noise isolation. It helps to not pick up as much ambient noise, and it also helps for you to be able to listen and hear what's coming through, as well as not getting too much echo or feedback. As you guys may probably notice, I've got some additional coworkers this week. They're my four-legged friends, and they're not normally as well behaved as the coworkers that you would have in the office. So they're bound to do something, and that's okay. This is the reality that we're working in, and by and large, most people understand that that's going to be the case. And last but not least, I touched upon this a little bit earlier with regards to time management. Just again, consider utilizing your calendar for how you're going to space your day, or looking at it when you're setting that intent for the next week or for the next couple of days, and being mindful about the other things that are coming up on your schedule and how you're going to be able to slot in those critical items. So now we talked a little bit about the basics. I wanted to share the three common camps that I see that most businesses fall into. And just yesterday, I think Microsoft had a press conference where they're talking about transitioning the nomenclature, the naming of Office 365 to now Microsoft 365, and that sets a good stage or setup for what I wanted to talk about today, which is on the back of the house. When many of us are setting up our businesses, we tend to have the options to go with our own dedicated servers or go with the route of cloud computing. And those tend to be the two major ones that we see in these environments, which are backed by either the Microsoft side of the house or Google Suite. And then we have other folks that, depending on the sector that you're working in, you might have a mix. And so the way that I laid this out today is I wanted to just impress upon you that for every line, these tend to be more or less some of the facsimiles that you can utilize. And if I tend to favor the Google Suite approach, only because Google was born on the cloud. They tend to have good security on the back end. They even have the ability for when you're working remotely, as does Microsoft and many others, the secondary factor authentication, so that you're not having to worry about the potential for the security of what you're working on to be compromised. And the other thing is that many of the Google Suite products are automatically allow for real-time editing and productivity or creation. I see that with us today, we have Teresa Rockwell from Progress 321 on the webinar. And actually last week, if not the week before, we were working on a work product. I have no idea if Teresa had worked on the platform before, but we were very easily able to move beyond the distance and work on a series of conference calls in order to be able to work on our final deliverable and get the product out before the deadline. That's not to say that Microsoft has not come forth and done similar things, but the issue with Microsoft, and I'll use that word lightly, is that they were not born in the cloud. So when it comes to in real-time interaction and being able to access things, you can sometimes see a little bit more issues surrounding access controls or allowing guests or outside users to come in and be able to do some of that collaboration with you. But the nice thing about Microsoft is that it's very familiar. And if you're going to be doing highly stylized work, like you're going to be working on a dissertation or a manuscript, Word is probably going to get you by a little bit better because you can set all of your styles and headers versus in Google Doc, you're a little bit more limited. One thing that I wanted to encourage everybody is that I did more of a bare bones approach to what the different opportunities were and wanted to just discuss them and rely on our rapport and exchange today via the questions features, because all of these things or all of these platforms allow you to go and evaluate and self-serve and see the training, the self-serve training opportunities so you can identify and see what might work best for you. Again, if you're already working with these and they are what is what your work day in and day out is based on, and let's say you have a Gmail account already, you already have access to many of these items, as well as if you're already on Microsoft 365. So these tend to exist within the basics of if you're going to be working on Excel spreadsheets versus a Google Sheet, making a PowerPoint, or even saving your files into a cloud-based system. The nice thing about when you save to cloud-based systems, if you're moving from a traditional hard drive or from a local server, is that there are redundancies. So unlike if you experience a catastrophic loss with your computer or it gets lost or stolen, if you save to the cloud, you can always pick up another device and access whatever the content was that you were working on and be able to pick up and continue going. The last items on the bottom, and I'll talk a little bit more about these, but below the yellow ribbon are items that are recommended for some level of collaboration. And Erik talked a little bit about Zoom and Slack, but these tend to be where you can interact with your teams, be it in Microsoft Teams, which is a little bit more like Slack, but it does have that increased security and did not experience a security breach back in 2015. Or you could utilize Skype or Skype for Businesses. The other item is that within the Google Suite, you have different options where you could leverage items like Google Hangouts or even Google Meet. And then on the mix side, where you might be utilizing different platforms, you can sign up for things like Zoom, Slack, or even GoToMeeting, which is a variant of what we're utilizing today for the webinar. So, Carlos, I'll just turn to you and see if there have been any questions that have come in regarding some of these camps or the background of.
Yeah, 1 second. Thank you, John. That was very informative. I find the way you lay out the different tools and functions, right? That essentially, when I see you put Microsoft 365, Google Suite, and the mix, is that we're looking for certain standardized functions, right? Word processing, spreadsheet, slides, storage, sharing notes, email, and collaboration, right? That we can achieve in different ways. So that's really helpful. There is a comment that we have. It's a comment from Jimmy Vigo. It says, I just wanted to share the thoughts that as a veteran working from the house, it is important that you distinguish your home duties with job. I usually pre-think a day by setting up a calendar, which are the goals that I have to achieve today for work, as in getting to talk to someone about a particular issue, getting it solved. Assign a time of the day to particular needs, use windows of time between tasks to help around the house, and or assign a time of the day to work in the yard, etc. Follow your schedule, try to work out. Walking is a good stress reliever. You know, it's interesting from this comment that I was just speaking with a colleague and friend yesterday about how, you know, we might be inclined, as you were saying, to organize our work from home as if we were in the office, and there is value in that. There are other approaches which are what we just heard, right? And the friend that I was speaking with yesterday was describing this, that for him, what he was doing was he sets a set of goals for the day, you know, 2, 3, 4, however many goals or tasks that need to be done. And as long as they get done by the end of the day, he's fine. In the middle of the day, he might go for a run or do yard work or something. It's really interesting to see. I think we're all learning about this. I don't know if you want to comment anything else, John. I don't see any other question here so far. If there are any other questions, please send them so that we can direct them.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Carlos. And I think to that point about it, that kind of falls along with the setting of the intention. And I think there are sometimes different work styles, right? Some of us are not necessarily bound by having to necessarily do time tracking for clients. Others of us might. And by and large, I think it depends on what your workflow is and what your ultimate product or deliverable is, because sometimes there are some instances where you can dedicate almost an entire day to really power through in order to get something done. But then there are other instances where you might need to be stopping and starting on other deliverables, just dependent. I think in the interest of time, I'll be a little bit brief with the remaining slides, but I just wanted to focus on what we're all leveraging more and more now. And to Erik's point about when more than a conference call, either a conference call or a phone call is needed, and you can see that there are tools out there. A lot of these were free before the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, but they continue to be, and there are just some subtle variants. So Zoom is the Brady Bunch style platform that you've all been seeing in most social media feeds, where they are being leveraged for either work or even for check-ins with the family. It continues to be free, and you can have unlimited one-to-one meetings. However, if you want to be meeting with people of 3 or more, it's going to time out after 40 minutes. And then that's when you'll have to consider the next step up, which is a $15 a month paid service. And I think right now, unless your budget is able to absorb it, go ahead and go with the monthly for many of these, because it's still a little bit of a wait and see as we continue to stay in place. Zoom, as well as the other platforms that are shown here, all work on multiple platforms. So if for some reason you have a computer that you're utilizing at home and you're taxing it and you're running a lot of processes on it, you can also use your mobile phone or maybe a spare iPad that you might have around, or even a spare cell phone that you might have that you can just put on the Wi-Fi network and log into and be able to have that specifically for teleconference. And then in the middle, I just wanted to highlight that Google Hangouts is something that continues to be free and is linked to most Gmail accounts. And many of us remember Skype. It's been around very long. It continues to be free, but it also is an opportunity for you to leverage it if you need it for domestic phone calls, in case some of you that might be utilizing landlines where you're at. Tools for project management. So here's where we start shifting a little bit. If you had not been utilizing a project management type of software or online platform before.
Can I interject with a question? Can I interject with a question that came up related to the previous slide? We are in camp 1 in my company, and we always seem to have issues with Skype. I don't know why. Do you find Zoom an easy way to hold video calls?
I do. So here's a couple of things for consideration if you're making a Zoom Zoom account for the first time, is that by default, I think it wants to make a meeting password for each one. each one of the Zoom meetings that you set up. I find that Zoom has historically already been utilized by federal agencies, by nonprofits, by a dearth of people, and that everybody is quickly adapting. I think if you're having problems with Skype, it might be because Skype was developed to push the most amount of video content, but by encoding it in a very small data packet. And so sometimes that might be leading to some of the issues that you're having. The other thing is that Skype is now owned by Microsoft, and so sometimes the access controls or the user accounts that you're utilizing might be slightly different. And so you might have been invited to a meeting in Skype from a business email address, but then you're logged in through your personal account. And so you're not technically allowed to be or log into that call, or it's not calling you at that particular user account. Whereas with Zoom, you get assigned and invited into a meeting ID, which is similar to a phone number that you're able to put in when you join a Zoom meeting. Just keep in mind that if you sign up for the Zoom free basic versions right now, that the issues with that is that they are not necessarily allowing for everybody to have the backup phone conference option, meaning that you can't all dial in. So they're relying heavily on people to connect with their internet audio, meaning that your device, be it your computer or your cell phone, is going to be utilizing your internet for not only the data, the voice packets, but also for the video. So keep that in mind. And again, you don't have to become experts. You don't have to make somebody a newly minted IT person in your company either. Each one of these companies put out very user-friendly tutorials that you can utilize and leverage. And that's another thing that I would really recommend for those of you who are having issues with any of these platforms. Have a couple of practice calls with the folks that you're going to be meeting with frequently and get them used to it first before you start making it mandatory and deploying, because people are already a little bit on edge worrying about what's going on around them. You don't necessarily want to add more stress by introducing a new technology that hasn't been practiced. All right, so back to project management. Project management is, in addition to the idea that you should be checking in with some regularity, I think going back to Jesus's question about how do you get it to the point that your workflow doesn't feel as if it is being micromanaged? And I think when we create this opportunity for somebody that is working among a team to be able to report out with transparency in terms of where something is and what they're needing, as long as they're adhering and respecting deadlines, they are pretty much working and managing almost all of their own projects. Many of the ones that I put up here are all offer a basic or free version, and you're just going to be limited by the number of users that you can invite in or by the number of projects that you can maintain. Asana tends to be one of the ones that people like, but I would caution you that regardless of which project management platform that you adopt, that you be mindful about when you're creating tasks and what they mean, because it's very easy to create a multi-threaded task where you say complete X tasks, and then you have all these subtasks, and before you realize it, you've created almost 100 steps for what might be something simple like send an email. And I know that sounds very trivial, but when you start living in the world of project management, sometimes we overthink and oversimplify not oversimplify, but we overthink the amount of detail that we need to put in, as opposed to just saying what needs to get done by when and who's in charge. Trello, for those of you that use the Kanban method, which is where you have the high, medium, and low priority, you might like something more like Trello. It also integrates to some of the other softwares like, or platforms, I should say, like Microsoft Teams. Because remember, Teams is going to be a little bit more of a place for you to have that real-time chat, be it for work product or for casual conversation. But then you kind of have this board or this status of all the tasks that are pending, and it allows you to, at a glance, see where everything is. The other one is Rike. I had one of my clients that recently adopted Rike, and it's something that they appreciated from their perspective because they were able to have all of their projects in one place. And then again, just the amount of tasks that needed to be completed based on specific deadlines. So I'll stop there and see, Carlos, if there are any questions. I would love to get into the opportunity to present on each one of these, but they could easily each take up 30 minutes to more time just to review all the functionality. So again, if based on what we talked about, if you have additional questions, feel free to look them up for yourself. And if you have additional questions about deployment, you're welcome to give me a send me an email or contact me through Nancy. I'll put up my email at the end of the presentation.
There's thank you. There is one comment from Emily just saying that, thank you for doing project management. We have been using Trello for about a year and now have transitioned to Notion, and there are pros and cons to each. And I guess that's the case with every tool, right? There are certain strengths, weaknesses, pros and cons to each of the tool that we choose to use.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Emily. And I think right now the social distancing and the orders to stay at home and work from home are also a good opportunity for us to reconsider some of our processes. And regardless of which project management software you're going to go with, or platform, or what have you, everything should also start with intent for what you plan to put in there. When does it make sense to create a task versus just having a conversation with some of your teams? Because if you're not all working remotely after this, it might make more sense for specific tasks to go in there and then still allow for some level of autonomy to exist in other facets of your day-to-day work. I will say on our end, we use a CRM that's known as Project Zoho, and that gives us the infinite opportunity to define custom tasks and outputs and run great reports. But that level of customization might not be something that you want to deploy during a pandemic, because at the end of the day, you just need to get certain things done and also make sure that there's this global view for either your managers, or if there's a top level review that needs to be occurring with some frequency.
I think your very clear point is important, which is what is it that we need to get done, right? To continue to get done, and then to choose the tools without perhaps overextending ourselves or being overly ambitious with adopting an extremely sophisticated system that might take us longer to learn or adapt to than getting the things done with simpler tools that like the ones you have described.
Right, exactly, because we could even go to the other gamut of this or the spectrum and say, I'm going to go and hire a custom software developer to customize some tools for me, and that might not be necessarily what makes the sense budget or time-wise for your organization.
That's right.
I think the last slide that I wanted to conclude with is that it's okay. Not everything needs to be digital. Some of the items that you work with can be analog. And I think one of my favorite things that I was introduced to last year was the idea of these, they're called rocket books. They are, I'd like to call them, they're like Tyvek coded type of sheets where you can write, and then with the use of special pens, they delete. There are other options that allow you to actually microwave another version of this, and the ink is heat sensitive, so everything gets erased and you're able to kind of have this green approach to taking paper notes. But one of the other things that I really like is that it is complemented by an app. So if you're the kind of person that likes to get away from the electronic interfaces and you want to sit down and you want to make a schedule or a calendar for where you're going to be for the remainder of the day or what your team needs to do, it's okay. And then you can take a picture of it with your phone, it digitizes it, and then you're able to push that out as a PDF to your team. And Nancy, I did not give you a heads up that I was going to put you on the spot, but Nancy and I used to work together, and this was one of the tools that I really appreciated watching her adapt to. I think she even continues to maintain it. She uses the Rocketbook microwave version. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, Nancy, and talk a little bit about your adoption of that Rocketbook and why you continue to use it.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I love the Rocketbook for a lot of reasons. You can code there's a place to code at the bottom what project you want it to go to. You can have it sent to multiple platforms, whether it's emails, Dropbox. And if you're an rabid note taker like I am, it's an easy way to take notes and then make sure that they're documented so other people in your team can see them. The other thing I would say is if you're taking notes, it's a lot less obtrusive to take notes with a pen and paper than it is to try to take notes on your computer when you're talking to somebody. Sometimes if you're taking notes on your computer and clicking away while you're trying to talk to them, it can be kind of off-putting to the person you're talking to. So this way you can take notes, have a record of it, not have to transcribe it again into your computer and load it up into a system where everyone can see it. And finally, it's microwavable.
Yeah, who doesn't like to microwave their notes at the end of the month, right?
Right, so.
It erases it if you microwave it, or what?
Yeah, you have to use a special pen that that you can buy at any store. It's called the Flex. There you go. But if you use that pen and you use a Rocketbook, you can put it in the microwave and microwave it, and it disappears. It also erases. There's a little eraser at the back of that pen, so as you're writing, you can erase. And I guess I'm going on too much about my love for Rocketbook.
No, I thank you, Nancy, for letting me put you on the spot. I really appreciate it. I think the reason I wanted to bring that up is because Rocketbook also, I'm sorry, my coworker's getting a little out of hand here. I think the other reason that I'd like to mention the Rocketbook is they have another complement to it, which are the rocket beacons, that if you have a whiteboard at home, or we eventually all make our way back to our offices, we will be able to go ahead and broadcast anything that you have up on that whiteboard, or even save it for posterity and be able to share it via PDF as well. So those are just some of the options that exist out there. And one of the nice things that I really like about Rocketbook is that you don't need to go out there and buy the special pens or the special book. They've made the PDF versions of this free, and I'm happy to pass these on to Nancy so she can share them with all the attendees. Yeah. And it allows you the same functionality if you download the app, and you're able to save all of those items. And they come in different versions, whether you want to do music writing or a dot grid pattern or a college lined or letter lined or even graph paper. So all kinds of options you have out there.
Yeah, so like, you can send those links to everyone.
Sorry. So like Nancy, I'm also a compulsive note taker, and I love the idea of the microwave feature of it. And you know, in your last, and I agree also, Nancy, that this issue of taking notes by computer or even by iPad can be so intrusive sometimes, as opposed to doing it with pen and paper. So having a tool that allows to record it is very helpful. And the other thing that I noticed in your last slide, John, which I find also very useful, are the scanning apps that exist on a phone or on a tablet. I think they're underappreciated, because you just, you write something or draw something on a whiteboard when you're in the office, and you can just take a picture, convert it to PDF, and send it right away to your email, or even sometimes to one of those applications like OneNote and others that.
Right. That's a really good point, Carlos. And I think for those of you that are listening, we are having to adapt to the different tools that we may or may not have in our home environment. And one of my favorite apps that I use is called Genius Scan, and I believe it exists on iOS, and it also exists on the Android. And it allows you to do just that. You take a picture, it automatically, if you have a high contrast background, it automatically converts it into a digital version, which can be a PDF or a picture file, like a JPEG. And then it even allows you to size it. So if you don't have a scanner, or you don't have a printer / scanner combo, you have a scanner in your phone. And I think most phones now even have integrated apps that help you level for when you're taking pictures of documents.
Yeah, no, they're a great tool. I don't think we have any other questions. If I could ask both Erik and John to come back on video. So here is John's contact. And I just want to thank everyone, and thank Nancy and MCA Innovation Center for organizing this session. We trust it was useful for us. I learned a lot, and I hope everybody did. And I think you have everyone's contact information if you have any additional questions.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you all.